Marcus Thompson never imagined that his quiet nature would one day save the royal palace. Standing at 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, he looked every bit the part of a traditional royal guard. His uniform was always perfectly pressed, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his posture remained straight even after 12-hour shifts. But unlike his fellow guards who boasted about their combat training and showed off their strength, Marcus preferred to observe and listen. Other guards often teased him about being too soft for the job. "Hey Marcus, when are you going to start acting like a real guard?" they would joke during their breaks. "Spend more time reading than practicing your punches." Marcus would simply smile and return to his book, usually something about history or human psychology. He had joined the Royal Guard 3 years ago, not because he loved fighting, but because he wanted to serve his country and protect people. The royal palace was buzzing with activity that autumn morning. Queen Elizabeth was hosting a crucial peace summit with representatives from 5 neighboring countries. Tensions had been rising for months over trade disputes and border disagreements. The summit was seen as the last chance to avoid what many feared could escalate into a serious conflict. Security was at its highest level, with guards posted at every entrance, corridor, and room. Marcus had been assigned to the East Wing, which seemed like the quietest area of the palace that day. Most of the action was happening in the main conference hall on the opposite side of the building. As he walked his patrol route, Marcus noticed something unusual. A delivery truck had been parked outside the service entrance for over 2 hours. The driver had unloaded some boxes earlier, but the truck was still there. Marcus made a mental note to check on it during his next round. The morning sun streamed through the tall palace windows as Marcus continued his duties. He greeted the cleaning staff politely, helped an elderly cook carry some heavy pots, and even stopped to pet the Queen's favorite corgi who had wandered into his section. These small interactions were what Marcus enjoyed most about his job. He believed that being a guard meant protecting everyone in the palace, not just the royal family. Around noon, Marcus overheard 2 kitchen workers talking in hushed tones near the service entrance. They were speaking in a language he didn't recognize, which struck him as odd since all palace staff were required to speak English during work hours. The men kept glancing toward the conference hall and checking their watches nervously. They noticed Marcus approaching. They quickly separated and went back to their tasks. Something felt wrong, but Marcus couldn't put his finger on what it was. His instincts, sharpened by years of quiet observation, were telling him to pay attention. He decided to keep a closer eye on the East Wing, even though everything appeared normal on the surface. Marcus had learned long ago that the most dangerous situations often looked completely ordinary at first glance. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus noticed more strange details that made his uneasiness grow stronger. The delivery truck was still parked outside, which was highly unusual. Palace protocol required all service vehicles to leave within 30 minutes of completing their deliveries. Marcus also observed that several staff members he didn't recognize were moving through the corridors. When he politely asked to see their identification badges, they showed him papers that looked official, but felt somehow wrong. The peace summit was reaching its most critical point. Through the palace's internal communication system, Marcus could hear updates about the negotiations. Representatives were discussing a major trade agreement that could bring prosperity to all 6 nations. But there were still significant disagreements. The Queen was personally mediating the discussions, which showed how important this summit was. For the future of the region, Marcus decided to investigate the delivery truck more closely. As he approached the vehicle, he noticed that the license plate was from a different country than what the delivery manifest indicated. The truck also had small modifications that seemed unusual for a standard delivery vehicle. There were extra antennas and what looked like reinforced panels on the sides. When Marcus tried to peer through the driver's window, he saw sophisticated electronic equipment that definitely didn't belong in a food delivery truck. His heart started beating faster as he realized this might be a serious security threat. Marcus quickly but calmly walked back into the palace and tried to contact his supervisor through his radio. However, he discovered that his communication device wasn't working properly. The radio was receiving static and couldn't connect to the main security office. This was extremely concerning because the palace's communication system was regularly tested and maintained. Marcus faced a difficult decision. He could leave his post to report the suspicious truck in person, but that would mean abandoning his assigned area during a critical time. Alternatively, he could try to investigate further on his own, but he had no backup and limited authority to take action. The palace's security protocols were very strict about guards staying at their assigned positions unless there was a confirmed emergency. As he wrestled with this dilemma, Marcus saw one of the unidentified staff members walking toward the service entrance where the mysterious truck was parked. The man was carrying what appeared to be a large duffel bag and kept looking around nervously. Marcus followed at a distance, using his knowledge of the palace's layout to stay hidden behind pillars and doorways. The man met with someone near the truck, and they began unloading several pieces of equipment. Marcus couldn't see exactly what they were doing, but their behavior was definitely suspicious. They worked quickly and quietly, constantly checking to make sure no one was watching them. Marcus realized he was witnessing what could be the preparation for a serious attack on the peace summit. The timing couldn't be worse. With all the world leaders gathered in one place and the future of international relations hanging in the balance, Marcus knew he had to act quickly, but he also understood that rushing into a dangerous situation without proper information could make things worse. Drawing on his love of detective stories and psychology books, he decided to gather more intelligence before taking action. He carefully positioned himself where he could observe the suspicious activity while remaining hidden from view from his hiding spot behind a stone column. Marcus watched as three men worked systematically around the truck. They were setting up what looked like electronic jamming equipment, which explained why his radio wasn't working properly. The devices were small but sophisticated, clearly designed to interfere with the palace's security communications. Marcus realized this was part of a well-planned operation to isolate the palace and prevent guards from coordinating their response to whatever was coming next. The men were speaking in low voices, but Marcus managed to catch fragments of their conversation. They mentioned something about the signal in 15 minutes after the announcement. Marcus's heart sank as he understood they were planning to disrupt the peace summit at a crucial moment. The announcement they referenced was likely the final agreement that the Queen and the representatives were scheduled to sign later. That afternoon, Marcus noticed that one of the men had a small earpiece and seemed to be receiving instructions from someone else. This suggested the operation involved more people than just these three individuals. Marcus began to suspect that some of the unidentified staff members he had seen earlier were also part of this plot. The scale of the conspiracy was becoming clear, and Marcus realized he might be the only person in the palace who was aware of the danger as he continued watching. Marcus saw the men pull out what appeared to be smoke devices and small explosive charges. They weren't planning to hurt anyone directly, but they intended to create chaos and panic during the peace summit. The smoke and noise would force an evacuation, destroying months of careful diplomatic work and potentially setting the stage for the conflict that the summit was meant to prevent. Marcus understood that he couldn't handle this situation through traditional security protocols. The normal response would be to call for backup and wait for reinforcements, but the jamming equipment made communication impossible. Even if he could reach other guards, the conspirators had clearly planned for a security response. They'd probably had contingency plans and escape routes already prepared, instead of panicking. Marcus drew on his natural inclination to think rather than fight. He remembered reading about historical situations where outnumbered individuals had succeeded by using intelligence and creativity instead of force. Marcus began to formulate a plan that would use his knowledge of human psychology and the palace's layout to his advantage. He realized that his reputation for being too soft might actually be his greatest asset in this situation, because the conspirators wouldn't expect a quiet, bookish guard to pose a serious threat to their operation. Marcus took a deep breath and began executing his carefully thought-out plan. Instead of confronting the conspirators directly, he decided to use their own tactics against them. His first step was to create confusion and doubt within their group. Marcus knew from his psychology readings that criminal operations often fell apart when trust between team members was broken. He quietly circled around to a different entrance and approached one of the conspirators, who was working alone near the truck. Speaking in a calm, friendly voice, Marcus said, "Excuse me, are you the new coordinator that Johnson sent? He told me to check if you needed any help with the equipment." The man looked confused and suspicious. "I don't know any Johnson," he replied nervously. Marcus nodded knowingly and said, "Oh, you must be working with the other team then. My mistake." This simple exchange planted a seed of doubt in the conspirator's mind. Marcus had made him wonder if there was another operation happening that he didn't know about, or if his own team leaders weren't telling him everything. Right. Marcus repeated similar conversations with the other two men, each time mentioning different names and creating the impression that there might be multiple competing groups working in the area. The psychological pressure was starting to work. Marcus could see the conspirators whispering urgently to each other and constantly looking around as if they expected to be discovered or betrayed. Their smooth, coordinated operation was beginning to show cracks as paranoia set in. Marcus knew he needed to escalate the pressure while they were still off balance. His next move was to target their communication system. Marcus had noticed that the man with the earpiece was the group's leader and the key to their coordination. Using his knowledge of the palace's service tunnels, Marcus was able to position himself directly below where the leader was standing. The old palace had several maintenance areas that were rarely used, but provided access to the building's infrastructure from the tunnel. Marcus could reach the electrical junction box that powered the service area where the truck was parked. He didn't want to cut all the power and alert the conspirators that someone was actively working against them. Instead, he created intermittent electrical problems that would disrupt their communication equipment without making it. It's obvious that they were being sabotaged. The jamming devices began malfunctioning, sending erratic signals that interfered with the leader's earpiece. Marcus could hear him getting frustrated as he tried to maintain contact with his handlers. "The signal keeps cutting out," the leader complained to his team. "Something's wrong with the equipment." The other conspirators were already nervous. From Marcus's earlier psychological manipulation, the technical problems made them even more anxious. Marcus realized he had successfully turned the conspirators' strengths into weaknesses. Their reliance on sophisticated equipment became a vulnerability when that equipment stopped working properly. Their need for coordination and communication became a source of stress and confusion when those systems were disrupted. Most importantly, their assumption that they were operating in secret became a paranoid obsession when Marcus made them think they might have been discovered or infiltrated. With the conspirators now confused and their equipment unreliable, Marcus prepared for the final phase of his plan. He knew that the peace summit would be concluding soon. He had to prevent the attack without causing a panic that could be just as damaging as the original plot. Marcus had observed that the conspirators were planning to wait for the signal before acting, which gave him a crucial advantage. Marcus returned to the service area and approached the group with complete confidence. Carrying a clipboard he had borrowed from a supply office, walked directly up to the leader and said in an authoritative voice, "Security sweep is complete. We found 3 unauthorized surveillance devices in the conference hall. The operation has been compromised, and all secondary teams are being recalled immediately." The leader stared at Marcus in shock. "Who are you? We weren't told about any security sweep." Marcus remained calm and professional, responding, "That's because we suspected there might be a leak in the communication chain. The higher-ups decided to keep this sweep classified until we could identify all the security risks." He gestured toward the truck and added, "You need to pack up immediately and follow the emergency evacuation protocol." The psychological pressure that Marcus had been building throughout the afternoon finally reached its breaking point. The conspirators were already doubting their mission and each other. Their equipment was malfunctioning, their communication was unreliable, and now someone claiming to be from their own organization was telling them the operation had failed. The leader tried to contact his handlers through his earpiece, but the intermittent electrical problems Marcus had created made it impossible to get a clear signal. Marcus pressed his advantage by creating a sense of urgency. "Look, I don't know what your specific orders were, but mine are to get everyone out of here in the next 5 minutes. There are counterintelligence teams moving into position, and if you're still here when they arrive, they won't ask questions first." He pointed toward the palace entrance and said, "The extraction point has been moved to the north parking area. You need to move now." The three conspirators looked at each other uncertainly. Everything Marcus was telling them fit with their existing fears and suspicions. They had been expecting a sophisticated security response, and Marcus was presenting exactly what they feared most: discovery by a counterintelligence operation that was one step ahead of them. Their training had probably emphasized the importance of following evacuation protocols when an operation was compromised. Within minutes, the conspirators were packing their equipment back into the truck. They were moving quickly but carefully, clearly more concerned about escaping than completing their original mission. Marcus watched from a distance as they loaded the jamming devices, smoke canisters, and other equipment that would have disrupted the peace summit. The leader was still trying to reach his handlers, but the electrical problems continued to interfere with his communication. As the truck pulled away from the palace, Marcus felt a mixture of relief and pride. He had successfully prevented a major incident without throwing a single punch or firing a shot. The peace summit could continue uninterrupted, and the diplomatic work that had brought 6 nations together would not be destroyed by artificial chaos and panic. Marcus had proven that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to avoid having the fight at all. Marcus waited until the suspicious truck was completely out of sight before allowing himself to fully process what had just happened. He had single-handedly prevented what could have been a devastating attack on one of the most important diplomatic events in recent history. As he walked back toward his patrol route, Marcus could hear celebratory sounds coming from the main conference hall. The peace summit had been successful, and the 6 nations had signed their historic agreement. The palace's communication system began working normally again once the jamming equipment was gone. Marcus's radio crackled to life with routine security updates and congratulations being shared about the successful conclusion of the summit. None of his fellow guards or supervisors had any idea what had almost happened in the East Wing. And Marcus realized he faced an interesting dilemma about whether and how to report the incident. Later that evening, after his shift had ended, Marcus was approached by Captain Williams, the head of palace security. "Thompson, we need to talk," the captain said with a serious expression. Marcus's heart skipped a beat, wondering if he had somehow gotten into trouble for his unconventional handling of the situation. They walked to a quiet office, and Captain Williams closed the door behind them. "We've been monitoring some concerning intelligence chatter about potential threats to the summit, Captain," Williams began. "Our sources suggested there might have been a plan to disrupt the proceedings. But when our teams investigated, they found no evidence of any actual plot. However, several witnesses reported seeing a suspicious delivery truck that left the area. Around the same time, the intelligence chatter suddenly went silent." Marcus realized that the palace's security apparatus had been aware of the general threat, but hadn't been able to identify the specific details or prevent it through conventional means. Impromptu operation had succeeded where traditional security methods might have failed. Captain Williams continued, "We also discovered that someone had been manipulating the electrical systems in the service area, and several staff members reported conversations with an unidentified security operative who seemed to know details about classified operations." Taking a deep breath, Marcus decided to tell the full story. He explained his observations throughout the day, his decision to investigate the suspicious activity, and his strategy for neutralizing the threat without violence or causing panic. Captain Williams listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification about specific details. When Marcus finished his account, the captain sat back in his chair with an expression of amazement. "Thompson, what you did was either incredibly brilliant or incredibly reckless," Captain Williams said. "Probably both. You violated several protocols by not reporting the threat immediately and by taking independent action without authorization. However, you also prevented what our intelligence analysts confirm would have been a serious attack on the summit. The psychological tactics you used were more effective than any physical intervention could have been." The story of Marcus's unconventional victory quickly spread through the palace's security community. His fellow guards, who had once teased him about being too intellectual and peaceful, now looked at him with new respect and curiosity. The incident became a case study in creative problem-solving and demonstrated that there are many different ways to protect people and serve one's country. Marcus returned to his regular duties, but his approach to security work had evolved. Continued to be observant, thoughtful, and nonviolent. But he now had complete confidence in his ability to handle serious threats through intelligence and creativity. The Peace Summit had been saved not by traditional strength or weapons, but by one quiet guard, who understood that the mind can be more powerful than any fist. Years later, when people heard the story, they could hardly believe how the royal guard had won without throwing a single punch.